Virtually all the celebrations surrounding Pokemon's 20th anniversary are related to the main games, and that makes a certain amount of sense since when you think about Pokemon, that's where your mind goes. But it's very easy to forget about the spin-off games. Are they merely a cash-in on the brand, or are they hiding something wonderful? After all, as soon as you veer away from the main games, you start to notice a lack of reliance on a tried and tested formula. Not to say that the games that gave Pokemon its fame are unwilling to take risks, they don't really need to, but you can't help but be thankful for a catalogue of spin-off Pokemon games that delve into some severely zany territory. Even with the worst games, there's still plenty to think about. And there's loads of these kind of games. It's almost like you can sell something with Pikachu's face alone. But the better games offer a different experience to the standard RPG adventure. The best games make you wonder why there hasn't been more in a similar vein. Main games aren't likely to come out more than once every few years, but in the meantime, this goddamn goldmine of Pokemon spin-offs. Something here for everyone. If there's one particular part of Pokemon media that I never got into as a kid, it'd be the card game. I mean, I get how it works, I think, and it's great to see it still going so strong after all these years, but it's a lot to take in. Feels like there's an awful lot going on here. But that's okay, because there's an actual licensed video game trading card game, and in more ways than one, I think I prefer this. Mostly because it teaches you how to play the game at a very steady pace while also injecting an air of familiarity about it. In a lot of ways, it feels quite a lot like a normal Pokemon game. You have starter Pokemon or starter decks. There's 8 leaders you need to defeat and pick up medals from, with the ultimate goal of defeating Grandmasters who are Elite Four members in everything but name. And you can enjoy this very Pokemon-like adventure while beating trainers in a completely different way. It's actually held up quite well. Definitely better than the first generation of actual Pokemon games, and even though my first experience of this game was watching someone stream it last year, I can flick through the soundtrack and find loads of really catchy, almost nostalgic tunes that have been consigned to that page of history reserved for lost classics. Why carry around a deck of cards when you got something like this? As a twitchy 7-year-old with a library of video games limited to what I can persuade my parents to buy, I tried to make the most of what I had. That's probably why I grew to love Pokemon, since you'll never run out of Pokemon to train. I couldn't tell you how much time I pumped into my copies of Ruby and Emerald in pursuit of having my favourites all at level 100. But sometimes you do need something new to obsess over, even if it is just a stopgap before the next generation locks itself into the next handheld. Never played proper pinball much as a child. I didn't need to. You don't often see spin-off games get a sequel without them becoming their own series, at which point you almost end up with something that rivals the main series if you think about Mega Man X against the classic series. Pokemon Pinball was never going to surpass the normal games, but it didn't really need to. Does anyone remember Metroid Prime Pinball? This was back in the day when Nintendo could put their name to a Metroid spin-off without shitting all over the franchise's legacy. It was Pinball, but everything was Metroid themed. Pinball is fun enough as it is, so all you're doing is sprinkling a bit of Metroid where it matters the most. Effectively, exactly the same with Pokemon Pinball, and in particular, the Ruby and Sapphire version where lessons were learned from the first game on the Game Boy Color, and this deceptively addictive game entered our lives. It's Pinball, but you can catch Pokemon. That's just about as good as life gets, really. I played a lot of Pokemon spin-offs for the prize you get for beating it. Beating XD Gale of Darkness gave you a Lugia you could trade back to the main games. Beating Pokemon Channel gave you a Jirachi, but only if you're European or Australian. Yeah, high five convicts! And beating the first Pokemon Ranger game gave you a Manaphy, which around the time of Gen 4 where I was just starting to lose interest in Pokemon, gave me a welcome break for what was feeling like monotony. Not only were the Pokemon Ranger games different, but they also put the DS's touchscreen to work in a far more impactful way than anything that the main series could offer. Kinda like real-time strategy where you draw circles around Pokemon to catch them. You can see why it caught on. And then there's Shadows of Almia. It's been a while since I first played the first Pokemon Ranger, but I've heard it hasn't aged all that well, at least in comparison to the vast striding improvements made in later games. Guardian Signs is pretty cool, but Shadows of Almia gives you huge freedom in your partner choice, a more solid storyline, you can even go scuba diving for Pokemon to run rings around. It's kind of an awkward combination of the best game in the Pokemon Ranger side series, but also not really different enough to get you thinking about playing any others. It's like a really good special edition with an evil team called Team Dim Sum. That's just, it's too early in the day for puns like that. Come on. Before X and Y, the prospect of a 3D Pokemon adventure was a long-term carrot on the end of the stick. There was the sense that the series would get there eventually, but it needed the right hardware to make this possible on a handheld, and the right premise to make this viable on a main console. The two Stadium games gave us a glimpse into this exciting future, but it wasn't until Pokémon Colosseum in 2004 that this dream was fully realized. And damn is it fancy. Not really one for the purist though. Catching Pokemon is restricted to scripted encounters where the downside is you don't really get to choose what you catch. With the upside being that holy shit you can steal Pokemon off trainers, that's so fucking cool! What I think is important is that this is a Pokemon spin-off game that actually sort of takes itself seriously. Or at least as serious as a game can be with this guy in it. You're not just catching Pokemon here, you're like some all-action Pokemon liberating force sweeping through the Ore region, purifying corrupted Pokemon and catching legendaries. After Pokemon Channel, which, while being kinda fun, feels very one-dimensional, Colosseum acted as a step in the right direction. Just a shame we didn't take too many more steps in this direction. Corrupted versions of Kalos and Alola Pokemon? A man can dream. Do you remember when we saw Hyrule Warriors and thought that it was both completely ridiculous and also the best thing we had ever seen? Yeah, turned out pretty well in the end. You put a Nintendo IP in the hands of some other crazy Japanese developers and give them license to make it as batshit insane as they want. Don't know why this wasn't thought of sooner. First Zelda, maybe one day something like Mario or Metroid, but for now, a fucking Pokemon fighting game. And why the hell not? Pokemon has always gotten work done as a turn-based RPG, but you play something like Pokemon Rumble and you don't immediately want to kill yourself, so why not expand on that a bit? Pokken Tournament feels like a joke that ended up being pretty sweet in the end. It's as stupid a spectacle as Chandelure battling Suicune using fighting game combos is, but god damn if it isn't fun as all hell. Combining Tekken and Pokemon could have been messy, but with a great tutorial system that lets you learn a lot of the basics of every character's fighting system, while also having mechanics that have enough advanced depth to them that there's an official tournament with some serious prize money. It's kind of the best of both worlds. Pokemon fighting game? Yeah, easy. Pokemon Colosseum may have had a better narrative and a sense of adventure that the name of Pokemon has been built on since its inception, but it's got nothing on what the Pokemon Stadium games can offer you. I played these games when I was pretty young, so some of the harder battles were a bit beyond me, but holy fuck these minigames! I heard you can fight Mewtwo in the first Stadium game, but I'm not sure I've got the application to work towards that when I could be making Lickitungs eat plate after plate of sushi. I know my priorities. I have fonder memories of the second game, and I don't think it's all about the minigames this time. Might be because Johto is my super special nostalgic generation and seeing the Pokemon that formed my first journey through a Pokemon game in full 3D was pretty fucking special. That's pretty much all these games needed to do. I do remember Stadium 2 having more features though, or at the very least modified ones. Naturally the Gym Leader Castle was both Johto and Kanto fights, and I think the Petite Cut from Pokemon Stadium, this piece of shit competition where you can only use small light Pokemon, yeah, that isn't here in the second game. That's enough of an improvement on its own. The minigames are the most memorable part of the Stadium games in my eyes, and I think what I spent most of my time on, but I found out only recently that the Japanese version of Stadium 1 didn't have any minigames in them. I guess if you want to focus on the actual battling itself you can do that, but you can put other Drowsies to sleep. You're telling me you don't want that? Pokemon gets a bit of a bad rap for the audience it's carved out for itself over the years. They're not legitimate claims, but you can't really escape the shouts of, "It's a kid's game, go play something manly." I remember that. But little do they know that a Pokemon game in the style of a first-person shooter graced our screens in 1999 and has built up quite the cult following since. Plus, without Pokemon Snap, I wouldn't have been able to get my hands on this limited edition Pikachu N64. For a long time, I thought all N64s looked like this. Look at it! His cheeks light up! Alright, so you don't shoot Pokemon with guns, that's a different game entirely, but you don't need to when you capture their souls by taking their picture. That's what cameras do, right? The concept of Pokemon Snap sounds really stupid, but by the time you get into it, you find yourself so deeply embedded in the routine of rolling through a cave or down a river, taking pictures of Pokemon and impressing Oak that you realize that there's absolutely no escape. It's a bit short and I can't help but want a sequel if we lived in a perfect world, but it's a fun, relaxing break from worrying about stats and type effectiveness, where you can knock Charmeleon into lava, knock Magikarp into a waterfall, and blow up an Electrode. It's very basic, but I remember the excitement I felt whenever I did something that brought up a new Pokemon to get a picture of. Though I remember having trouble getting this Mankey over the other side of the hill so you can pester ball him onto this switch. Still, anything to appease Professor Oak. I will finish what you started. In preparation for this video, I made sure that I played as many random Pokemon spin-off games as I could, so nothing was slipping under the radar. Pretty weird playing them at the same time as that ROM hack video. After a while, everything blurs together like some kind of horrendous acid trip. I've been making videos on YouTube for nearly 6 years now, and in that time I've had a lot of suggestions for what games I should be talking about. I don't think anything has been mentioned as often or as vociferously as anything from the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series. Oh yeah, we got there eventually. Sadly, I only had enough time to play one game in the series, but I did my research. I wanted to see what most people liked. That's how I ended up playing and loving Explorers of Sky, where being turned into a Pokemon and living among them, helping them with their problems and battling alongside them, feels way more natural than you'd think. Pokemon is often criticized for not having a concrete storyline, although that's not such an issue nowadays. And this whole spin-off series, of which there are many entries, really puts a heavy focus on the kind of narrative that can only be told by talking Pokemon. Bit bizarre at times, but when it gets sad, it gets really sad. You're not allowed to have your procedurally generated dungeon-crawling Pokemon game without paying at the door in tears. EA has been selling DLC like that for years. Alright, so you see what was laid down by Pokemon Colosseum in the Stadium games and you think, yeah, we got something good here. I mean, obviously not good enough that will make more 3D console Pokemon adventure game extravaganzas after this, but hey, it just means that these games feel all the more special. I'll admit that there isn't a huge gap between Pokemon Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness, at least not 5 entries worth. But all the little changes made to how you purify Pokemon and how Shadow moves work stack up to create a far more polished game. Also a more varied one. It's surprisingly mature in places, most notably when the bad guys use a specially corrupted Shadow Lugia to lift up a cruise ship. That's one way of setting a precedent, but it still has the charm and comic relief that help to distract you from Colosseum's more serious moments. Not to mention that all the restrictions in place in Colosseum with regards to only catching Shadow Pokemon are removed somewhat in XD. You can actually catch normal wild Pokemon. That's crazy! And Mirror B's still here, wandering around, brightening up days across the land. No golden leisure suit this time, but he is moonwalking. Honestly, I feel like we need another new game like this on a Nintendo Switch when it comes out, but I will settle for a game where Mirror B is the star. Some kind of Pokemon DDR? You know you want it. Lots of spin-off titles with the word Pokemon in there somewhere like to veer just enough off course so that their contribution to the franchise can be distinct without feeling too distant. You don't want to be making too many comparisons to other games because you start putting yourself in competition, which you probably won't win. The Mystery Dungeon series is there if you want a turn-based, roguelike, dungeon-crawling game thing, but if you're the sort of person who wants an added dose of Fire Emblem in their Pokemon game, that's what Pokemon Conquest is for. Sadly, there isn't a sister game called Pokemon Birthright, but that's okay, we don't need one. There's more than enough to think about here. In standard Pokemon games, you start an adventure with your trusty starter Pokemon, collect badges, and try and become the strongest trainer in the world. In Conquest, you start an adventure with an Eevee and form an army of Pokemon so that you can invade enemy kingdoms and take them by force. You are the main general of a whole collection of warlords who all have their own Pokemon and quite like expanding their empire. What do you say to that? Importantly, Pokemon Conquest stands out as a successful attempt to inject some variety into the series, without getting too off track. This is a deeply tactical game where you can bring in knowledge about type effectiveness from the main series and unit placement from something like Fire Emblem. Ultimately, it's a bizarre combination, but proof that even two completely different franchises can work together. Now we just need that Call of Duty spin-off and we can finally destroy this planet. This is RabbidLuigi, and I think the most impressive part of Pokemon Conquest is that playing it makes you want to play some Nobunaga's Ambition, which is the other side of this spin-off. Now, these games are all very Japanese, but still get 4 or 5 stars out of 5 from multiple publications. There may not be any more Pokemon Conquest games, but you got all of these games. Just tape some Pokemon cutouts onto your screen and it'll be fine. Hey guys, thanks for watching. We're getting near the end of Pokken Month, and up until now I'd say it's gone pretty well. The countdowns have done as well as I would have liked them to, but I'm pleasantly surprised that the midweek side videos have been so popular. A lot of people have asked me if I would continue discussion videos after Pokken Month, and it has been in my plans for a couple of years to make something like that from time to time. I even drafted up a small list of topics at the time, but then I started making more countdowns and they did pretty well, and so I kind of left the idea behind. I'll think about it later. For now I'm just waiting for Sun and Moon to come out in Europe. We do love you over here, Game Freak, I don't know if you know that.